Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today in this video, let's have one very common React interview question, that is the simple counter. So in this counter we have two buttons, like to increment the count and decrement the count, and then we have a reset button, and then here we have an extra thing, that is increment and decrement by some value. It means we have an input field of type number. The user will type some number, let's say 5, then the counter will increase by 5 and decrease by 5. Let's say suppose if a user enters 100, then the counter will increase by 100 or decrease by 100. It means it will take the value from user, and according to that value, the counter will work. It means increment or decrement. So let's have this. So I'll be using a shortcut, that is RFCE, to have our functional component. And as usual, I already have my CSS part. So let me import that also. That would be counter.css. And let's just quickly create the layout for our counter. So I'll be using React fragments. And let's have a heading as simply counter, then a p tag which will hold the value of count. So let's give an initial value as 0. Now let's have two buttons, one for decrementing the count and other for incrementing the count. So let me do one thing. Let's just first create this counter simple by increment and decrement functionalities, and later on we will add that reset button and the user input part. So let's just create this. So for that I'll be needing a use state hook, and here also I need to have state variable, that is count, and the function which will update the value of state variable count, that is set count, with the initial value as 0. And now we will use this state variable count here instead of fixed dynamic value 0. And now we need to add event listeners to these buttons, like increment and decrement button. So the event listener would be on click. So here we need to decrement. So let's give the name of the function as decrement count. Now we need to define this function. It means if this button is clicked, what we need to do? We need to define inside this function. So we will simply have decrement count. Now we will simply use this function set count to update the value of this state variable count. So we will simply write that. And here if I write previous value, then whatever the value of the state variable, that is count, here we have 0, will get stored here in this previous value. Now we can simply do anything we want. So previous value would be -1. And we need to do the same thing with our increment button. Event listener. Now we will give the name of the function as increment count. Now we need to define that also. So we will do the same thing, only we will change the name, like this time increment count. And here instead of -1, we will write +1. So now we have our count. It is incrementing by 1 and decrementing by 1. Now we need to have our reset button. How to have that? So we will simply have another button as reset. Now the same thing we need to do. Again an event listener with the name of the function as reset count. Now again, we need to define that function like reset count. Now this time simply set count would be 0, set to 0. It means if this button is clicked, this function will be called and it will simply set the value of this state variable count to 0 again. Let me show you. So I increase the value to 12. Then if I press this reset, see, it is going back to 0. So now the main part, that is how to take the user input. If you want to take the user input, how to have that? Simply an input field with the type as number, and let's have one h1 with the heading as increment, decrement by the value which will be seen here. And then we need to add another event listener, that is this time on change, to capture whatever the user will write. So let's give the name of the function as handle change. And now we need to define that function also. So handle change would be, and where to store whatever the user will write. Yes, we need to have another state variable as, let's say we have our state variable as number, and the function which will update the value of this state variable number simply as set number with initial value as 0 again. And now here we were decrementing and incrementing by a fixed value, that is -1 and +1. Now we only need to change this. It means instead of this -1, we need to decrement this by the value which the user will write here, that is the number. Whatever the user will write will get stored here in the number. So the previous value minus the number and previous value plus the number. And here in this function, we need to use this function set number to capture whatever the user will write. And how to capture whatever the user writes? Yes, with the event object. So let's have one variable as user input. Now we will use this event object. It will be event dot target dot value, and here set number would be simply the user input, this thing, and we are done. But there would be still issue. It means now if you try to increment or decrement by the value the user entered, let's say the user enters 5. Now you will see, so instead of incrementing or decrementing, it is simply concatenating it. It means whatever the user is writing here in the input field, it is treating that thing as the string and simply it is concatenating it. So whenever you have an input field of whatever type it may be, like type number or maybe type date, it will always be treated as strings. So you need to convert that thing into the integer again. So let me prove myself. Let me show you by console logging this thing. So here I have my console open. So what we will do, we will simply console.log. We will use a type of to determine the type. So type of and this thing, the user input value. So now, so suppose if a user enters 5 to see, it is showing a string. If a user enters any other number like 100, it's again a string. So we need to convert that thing. How to do? Either you can use a JavaScript built-in method that is simply the number. It's a JavaScript built-in function that converts the string into the integer, or you can use parseInt. So we will use parseInt. Now let me show you. Now if a user enters 5, so see, it's showing the type as number. Now if I try to increment this, it will simply work as a normal counter and decrement as well. So let's give a value as 50 to see. It's working fine. So by seeing this question, many of you might be thinking that this one is a very simple question, and if the interviewer asks, you will simply create this in few minutes. But most of you will make a mistake here in this part, in the user input part. So whenever you have to perform calculation on the user input thing, always make sure to convert that thing into the integer first, either by this parseInt or maybe by the number, that is the JavaScript built-in function. So yes, that's it for this video. Hope you understood this concept in a much better and easier way. So see you all in the next one. Till then, take care.